Amara was just 8 years old, but her world was already weighed down by the burdens of poverty. She lived in a small, dilapidated apartment on the outskirts of a sprawling city, where opportunities seemed as scarce as the sunlight that rarely filtered through the smoggy air. Her mother, Nadine, worked tirelessly as a cleaner at a downtown office building, often taking on extra shifts just to make ends meet. But even with Nadine's unwavering dedication, their days were punctuated by hunger and uncertainty. Amara's father had left before she was born, leaving Nadine to navigate the challenges of single motherhood alone. Their apartment was modest, a single room with peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards. The kitchen consisted of an old stove and a mini-fridge that groaned whenever it ran. Despite its disrepair, Nadine kept the space spotless, a testament to her determination to create a semblance of normalcy for her daughter. But the reality of their life was harsh. On many nights, Nadine would go without food so that Amara could eat. Meals were often reduced to simple staples: rice, beans, or bread. Fresh produce and meat were luxuries they could rarely afford. Amara's clothes, hand-me-downs from a local charity, were either too big or too small, yet she wore them without complaint. Amara's school life offered little reprieve. Although she loved learning, her classmates' taunts about her patched clothing and worn-out shoes were relentless. Teachers, though kind, often overlooked her struggles, assuming she was just another quiet child from a tough background. Amara found solace in books, immersing herself in stories that transported her to worlds far removed from her own. Despite her hardships, Amara possessed a resilience that belied her age. She would often help her mother with chores, carefully folding the laundry or sweeping the floor, while Nadine prepared their meager dinners. When her mother returned home late at night, exhausted but smiling, Amara would greet her with a warm hug, her small arms encircling Nadine's tired frame. However, their fragile equilibrium was shattered one particularly cold winter evening. The temperature had plummeted, and their already tenuous food supply had run out. Nadine's paycheck wouldn't arrive for another 2 days, and the pantry was bare. Amara's stomach growled incessantly, a painful reminder of their dire situation. "Mama, I'm so hungry," Amara whispered, as they sat huddled under a blanket to keep warm. Her big brown eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she tried to stay brave, not wanting to add to her mother's worries. Nadine's heart ached at the sight of her daughter's desperation. "I'll figure something out, sweetheart," she assured her, though she had no idea how she would keep that promise. With no money and no one to turn to for help, Nadine felt the walls of their small apartment closing in on her. The next day, driven by hunger and a deep sense of responsibility for her mother, Amara made a decision that would change their lives forever. She slipped out of the apartment while Nadine was at work, clutching a worn-out backpack she had found in the corner of their room. She didn't have a plan, just a desperate hope that she might find something, anything, to ease their hunger. Amara wandered through the bustling streets, her small frame dwarfed by the towering buildings and hurried passers-by. Eventually, she found herself in front of a grocery store. The bright displays of fresh produce and baked goods were almost too much to bear. Her stomach churned with both longing and fear as she watched customers casually fill their carts. Summoning her courage, Amara entered the store. She kept her head down, trying to blend in as she wandered the aisles. The smells of freshly baked bread and ripe fruit were intoxicating. She picked up a loaf of bread and a small pack of cheese, her hands trembling as she placed them in her backpack. But as she turned to leave, her heart pounding like a drum, a firm hand gripped her shoulder. "Young lady, what do you think you're doing?" The store manager's voice boomed. Panic surged through Amara as she was escorted to the back office. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain, but her words were a jumbled mess of fear and desperation. The police were called, and soon Amara found herself sitting in a cold, sterile room at the local station. A sympathetic officer tried to comfort her, offering her a cup of water and a blanket, but Amara's thoughts were consumed by worry for her mother. She couldn't imagine how Nadine would react to the news. Hours later, Nadine arrived, her face pale and drawn. She wrapped Amara in her arms, her voice breaking as she assured her daughter that everything would be okay. But even as she spoke those words, Nadine knew that their situation had become even more precarious. Little did they know that the events of that day would set in motion a chain of events that would bring them before a judge and change their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. The courtroom was a solemn place, its high ceilings and dark wood paneling exuding an air of authority that felt both intimidating and imposing. Amara sat on a small wooden bench, her legs barely reaching the floor, as she nervously clutched her mother's hand. Nadine sat beside her, her face pale and tense, the weight of their situation etched into every line of her expression. Around them, the murmurs of spectators filled the air, a mix of curiosity and judgment in their eyes as they glanced at the small girl in the oversized coat. The case had attracted attention, not because of the crime itself — petty theft was a common occurrence in the city — but because of Amara's age and the heartbreaking circumstances that had led her there. Judge Mitchell presided over the courtroom, his stern features partially obscured by the stack of papers before him. He was known for being firm but fair, and as he adjusted his glasses, his gaze settled on the young defendant before him. "This court is now in session," the bailiff announced, and the room fell silent. The sound of the gavel echoed sharply, signaling the gravity of the moment. "Young lady," Judge Mitchell began, his voice steady but not unkind, "you stand accused of shoplifting. Do you understand what that means?" Amara nodded, her small frame trembling. Her voice was barely a whisper as she answered, "Yes, sir." "And do you understand that what you did was against the law?" the judge continued, his eyes studying her intently. Amara hesitated before nodding again. "Yes, sir," she repeated, her voice quivering. "Tell me then." Judge Mitchell leaned forward slightly, his tone softening. "Why did you take those items from the store?" The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Amara shifted in her seat. She glanced at her mother, whose eyes brimmed with unshed tears, before turning back to the judge. Her voice, though small, carried the weight of her desperation. "I was hungry, sir," she began, her words halting but earnest. "My mama worked so hard, but we didn't have any food. I just wanted to help. I didn't mean to steal. I was just so hungry." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Some of the spectators exchanged uneasy glances, while others looked at Amara with newfound sympathy. Judge Mitchell's expression remained unreadable as he listened, though a flicker of emotion passed through his eyes. "You're telling me," he said after a moment, "that you stole because you were hungry? And you thought this was the only way to get food?" Amara nodded, her hands gripping the edge of her coat tightly. "Yes, sir," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to make trouble. I just didn't know what else to do." Judge Mitchell leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he considered her words. The silence in the room was deafening, the weight of Amara's confession hanging heavy in the air. Finally he spoke. "Thank you for your honesty, Amara," he said, his tone measured. "I want you to know that admitting your mistake takes courage, and I commend you for that. But stealing is still a crime, and this court must address it." Amara's shoulders sagged, and Nadine's grip on her daughter's hand tightened. The judge's gaze shifted to Nadine, who looked up, her face a mixture of fear and resolve. "Ms. Green," he addressed her, "I can see that you've been doing your best under difficult circumstances, but I need to understand more about your situation before I make a decision." Nadine nodded, her voice trembling as she explained their struggles, the long hours she worked, the constant juggling of bills, and the painful choices she had to make just to keep a roof over their heads. As she spoke, tears streamed down her face, and the rawness of her pain filled the room. When she finished, the courtroom was silent once more. Judge Mitchell's expression softened, and he took a deep breath before addressing the court. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "it is clear to me that this is not a case of malice, but one of desperation. This young girl acted out of hunger, not greed, and her mother has been fighting an uphill battle to provide for her. While the law must be upheld, compassion must also guide our actions." He turned back to Amara, his gaze steady. "Amara," he said, "what you did was wrong, but I believe you understand that. And because of your honesty and your circumstances, I'm going to take an unusual step today." The room buzzed with anticipation as the judge reached for his pen. He scribbled something on a piece of paper before looking up. "I am sentencing you to community service," he announced, "and I am waiving all fines and fees. Instead, I will personally cover the cost of the items you took." The crowd erupted into murmurs, and Nadine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Amara's eyes widened in disbelief. Judge Mitchell held up a hand to quiet the room. "Furthermore," he continued, "I will be reaching out to local organizations to ensure that you and your mother receive the support you need. No child should ever feel the need to steal because they are hungry." Tears streamed down Nadine's face as she clutched her daughter to her chest. Amara looked up at the judge, her eyes filled with gratitude and awe. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted from one of judgment to one of profound empathy, as Judge Mitchell's unexpected kindness left everyone in shock. The courtroom remained silent, the gravity of Judge Mitchell's words sinking into the hearts of everyone present. As he stood, reaching into the pocket of his robe, the sound of paper rustling filled the room. To the astonishment of all, he pulled out his own wallet. The judge carefully withdrew a few bills and handed them to the bailiff. "Please ensure these are given to the store to cover the cost of the items taken," he instructed calmly, his tone unwavering. The courtroom erupted into a murmur of disbelief and awe. Many could not believe what they were witnessing. A man of authority, taking personal responsibility to help a family in need. Amara's wide eyes darted between her mother and the judge, her small face a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. Nadine, overcome with emotion, covered her face with her hands as silent sobs racked her body. The gesture was small, but it symbolized something much greater: compassion and hope in the face of adversity. Judge Mitchell wasn't finished. He straightened and addressed the court once more. "This case isn't about theft. It's about a system that has failed a hard-working mother and her innocent child. We, as a community, must do better." Moved by his words, an elderly woman in the gallery stood up. "I'd like to help too," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. She reached into her purse, pulling out a $20 bill and handing it to the bailiff. One by one, others followed suit. Young professionals, parents, retirees, each stepping forward to contribute whatever they could spare. The atmosphere in the courtroom transformed into one of unity and warmth. A local journalist who had been covering the case scribbled furiously in her notebook, knowing this story would resonate far beyond the courtroom walls. Cameras flashed as others captured the remarkable moment, ensuring it would be shared with the world. Amara clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face as she watched the outpouring of support. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt seen. Not as a criminal, but as a child in need of care and compassion. Nadine, still overwhelmed, managed to whisper, "Thank you," to those around her, her voice thick with gratitude. As the contributions piled up, Judge Mitchell turned back to Amara. "Young lady," he said with a soft smile, "I want you to remember this moment. You are not alone, and there are people who care about you. But with this kindness comes responsibility. Promise me you'll work hard to make things better for yourself and your mother." Amara nodded vigorously, her voice barely audible through her tears. "I promise, sir." The ripple effects of that day's events extended far beyond the courtroom. The story quickly went viral, with headlines highlighting Judge Mitchell's humanity and the community's collective compassion. Local charities reached out to Nadine, offering assistance with groceries, rent, and job opportunities. A crowdfunding campaign, started by one of the spectators, raised enough money to ensure that Amara and her mother would never have to worry about their next meal again. In the weeks that followed, Judge Mitchell's actions inspired a movement within the city. Schools organized food drives, local businesses set up donation bins, and volunteers came together to address food insecurity in their neighborhoods. Amara's story became a beacon of hope, showing that even in the darkest of times, empathy and kindness could shine through. As for Amara and Nadine, their lives changed in ways they could never have imagined. Nadine was able to secure a stable job with the help of a local nonprofit, and Amara, with a newfound sense of confidence, excelled in school. The young girl often thought of that day in the courtroom, her heart swelling with gratitude, not just for the judge, but for every stranger who had stepped forward to help. Years later, as an adult, Amara would recount the story to her own children, teaching them the importance of compassion and community. And though she had grown older, she never forgot the man who had looked beyond her mistakes to see her humanity, setting her life on a path filled with hope and possibility. The days following the courtroom's remarkable turn of events marked the beginning of a new chapter for Amara and her mother, Nadine. With the funds raised by the community and the support of local organizations, their immediate struggles were eased. For the first time in years, their pantry was full, and the worry etched into Nadine's face began to soften. More than just financial relief, the outpouring of compassion from strangers renewed Nadine's hope in humanity. Nadine soon secured a stable job as a receptionist at a local nonprofit that had heard about their story. The position not only paid better than her previous cleaning work, but also provided her with a supportive network of colleagues who genuinely cared about her and Amara's well-being. With a stable income, Nadine was able to afford better housing, and the two moved into a modest but comfortable apartment in a safer neighborhood. For Amara, the transformation was profound. Her classmates and teachers began treating her differently, no longer seeing her as just the quiet girl in worn-out clothes, but as a resilient child who had endured more than most could imagine. Her newfound confidence manifested in her schoolwork, where she excelled in reading and writing. Encouraged by her teachers and buoyed by the community's support, Amara began to dream of a future she never thought possible. Years passed, and Amara blossomed into a bright and ambitious young woman. She earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, where she studied social work, inspired by the kindness that had once saved her and her mother. She dreamed of giving back to the community that had given her so much, dedicating her life to helping children and families in need. Throughout her journey, Amara often thought of Judge Mitchell. His words and actions had left an indelible mark on her, shaping her understanding of justice and compassion. She kept a small clipping of the newspaper article about her case in her journal, a reminder of how one moment of kindness had changed everything. After graduating with honors, Amara returned to her hometown to work for a community center that provided resources for low-income families. Her efforts quickly gained recognition, and she became a prominent advocate for social justice and community empowerment. She often shared her story during speeches and workshops, emphasizing the power of empathy and the importance of looking beyond a person's mistakes to understand their struggles. One sunny afternoon, years after that pivotal day in court, Amara found herself standing in front of the courthouse, where her life had taken a dramatic turn. She had been invited to speak at a community event celebrating local heroes, and Judge Mitchell was among the honorees. Nervously adjusting the microphone, Amara began her speech. "I was just a scared little girl when I first walked into this building," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I didn't know what would happen to me or my mother. But what I found that day wasn't judgment or punishment. It was compassion. Judge Mitchell didn't just see a girl who had made a mistake. He saw a child in need, and he acted with kindness that changed my life forever." The crowd erupted into applause, and Amara's eyes scanned the audience until they landed on a familiar face. Judge Mitchell, now retired and slightly stooped with age, sat in the front row, his eyes glistening with tears. After the event, Amara approached him, her heart pounding. "Judge Mitchell," she began, her voice trembling, "I've waited years to thank you in person. Your kindness saved me and my mother. Everything I've accomplished, everything I've become, is because of what you did for us." The judge smiled warmly, his face lighting up despite the wrinkles that marked the passage of time. "Amara," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you don't owe me any thanks. What I did was what any decent person should do. You've turned your life into something remarkable. And that is thanks enough." The two talked for hours, sharing stories and reflecting on how a single act of kindness had rippled through their lives and the lives of countless others. Judge Mitchell shared how that day in court had inspired him to approach every case with greater empathy, often looking for ways to help rather than punish. Amara, in turn, shared how his example had guided her own work, encouraging her to always seek the humanity in every person she encountered. As the sun began to set, Amara and Judge Mitchell parted ways, but the bond they shared remained unbroken. Their story became a beacon of hope, proving that even the smallest gestures of kindness could create waves of change. Amara continued her work, expanding her reach and inspiring others to join her mission. She often told her story to children facing their own struggles, reminding them that they were never alone and that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. The lesson of Amara and Judge Mitchell's story echoed far and wide. Compassion has the power to heal, and unity can overcome even the greatest challenges. It showed that one act, no matter how small, could ignite a chain reaction of goodness, proving that in a world often divided, humanity's greatest strength lies in its ability to come together for a common purpose. And so, the legacy of that day in the courtroom lived on, a testament to the transformative power of kindness and the enduring impact of a single selfless act.